Good morning, and welcome to the fifth and final day of this Caribbean Brownfield Week conference, Reimagining Recovery for Resilient Communities. This is the sixth annual conference presented by the Center for Creative Land Recycling. The CCLEAR is a 23-year-old national nonprofit organization that sees the repurposing of underutilized and environmental impacted properties connected to issues of environmental justice, resilience, and community building. CCLEAR provides one-on-one technical assistance in support of EPA Brownfield grant application. So definitely that's the organization to go for in resources of all land reuse issues and questions. This year, the sixth annual conference is presented by CCLEAR in partnership with U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Region 2, the Center for Habitat Reconstruction, and the Environmental Development and Sustainability Incorporation. I would like to thank the team for making an amazing conference this week. We have had sessions that have included training with practical methods for winning grants and completing projects. They have demonstrated how successful projects are planned and carried out with community institutional support, and they have also provided a great space for networking. Today, we're specifically focusing on U.S. Virgin Islands. Today, now, we have our panel of Solar U.S. Virgin Islands, Resilient Power Grids for Emergency Preparedness. At 12, we'll have an interagency working group, so be on the lookout for that. And at 1:25, we'll have the closing reflections, resources, and next steps in reimagining recovery for resilient communities. At 1:30, we'll also have a network in small groups, so be in the lookout for that. And this has been an amazing conference. If any of you guys have had any issues of not attending or would like to review any of the sessions that we have had throughout the week, you can be on the lookout for an email next week. We'll be emailing a link to access all these presentations so you can have access to them and review them or have any follow-up investigations that you would like to further on. Before we start this panel and present all the speakers, I would like to talk a little bit about what we're doing today. This panel presents the intersection of solar, power grids, and resilience. It focuses on efforts and initiatives helping the U.S. Virgin Islands restore and repair its power system, as well as harden them to make them more resilient to future disaster-related events. We will have Kyle Fleming, Director of the U.S. Virgin Islands of Energy Office, and Elise Hotchkiss from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I'll be monitoring this panel. My name is Michelle Alvarado, and I'm with the community, with the Center of Habitat Reconstruction. I'm the community environmental lawyer for the organization. We are a Puerto Rican nonprofit-based organization that provides and collaborates with CCLEAR on providing technical assistance to the communities with all brownfield-related issues. Now, before presenting Kyle and Elisa, I would like to ask everyone to go to the Engage tab that we have here on the platform. We have a poll question that I would like everyone to read and answer. The question says, are the power systems in your community more resilient to future disaster-related events? The first option is yes. Second option is not completely, but we are on our way to make more resilient networks. No. The third option will be no, and I would like more information on how my community can benefit from an efficient energy resource utilization program. While we wait for those results from the poll, I would like to introduce both of our speakers, and I will start with Elise Hotchkiss. Elise Hotchkiss is a senior resilient analyst and technical group manager, leading the Resilient System Design and Energy Group within the National Renewable Laboratory Energy Security and Resilience Center. Her areas of expertise include disaster recovery leadership and technical assistance, resilience, and international sustainable development. Her focus is on analysis and outreach to increase deployment of resilient technologies and best practices within infrastructure systems and operations. As co-principal investigator on a laboratory director research and development project related to the value of resilience, she had led and published research on metrics for resilience evaluation and monetization of resilience solutions. She leads resilience assessments for federal, state, local, and tribal governments and provides technical assistance for international resilience sustainable development. Currently, she's co-chair of the IEEE Task Force on Power System Resilience Metrics and Evaluation Methods, and she also possesses a master's in energy efficient and sustainable buildings from Oxford School of Architecture. Thank you, Liza, for being here with us. We also have Kyle Fleming joining us. In 2016, Kyle Fleming returned to his home of St. Croix, US Virgin Islands, to fulfill his professional goal of transforming the energy sector within the US Virgin Islands. Upon his return, he took on the role as Director of Operations of a regional solar developer in the territory. Following Hurricane Irma and Maria, Mr. Fleming designed and installed solar plus battery storage systems territory-wide, which relieved the dependence on generators from many Virgin Islanders suffering through the extended blackouts. With 10 years of holistic energy industry experience, Mr. Fleming has continued to impact the energy profile of the territory. As Director of Virgin Islands Energy Office, Mr. Fleming has focused policy and program development around the following core pillars: sustainability, resiliency, workforce development, and efficient energy resource utilization. Mr. Fleming is also part of the U.S. Virgin Island Water and Power Authority Board, with a share in the Planning and Economic Development Committee. He also possesses a Master of Science in Energy Systems from Northwestern University. Thank you, Kyle, for joining us.
Thank you.
So according to the polls, so our speakers are aware of what we have here. We have that 50% of people answer yes. They think that their power grids and systems are more resilient for disaster-related events, and 50% answer that no, not completely. So with that in mind, we can start our panel on solar US Virgin Island resilient power grids for emergency preparedness. The first speaker will be Elise. If you can please. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. And good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and it's great to be part of such a wonderful conference. So today I'm going to be speaking about some of the work that we've been doing in the space of resilient power design for emergency preparedness and how this connects to resilience. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Elise Hotchkiss, and I'm a Senior Resilience Analyst at the U.S. Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL. We are located in Golden, Colorado, so it's presumably a little colder here today than it is where you all are joining. But just to give you an overview of NREL and what we do, we have over 2,000 employees, along with about 400 or 500 researchers and visiting scientists. We have world-class facilities, renowned technology experts, and our partnerships with industry, academia, and government are really key and important to the work that we do. We like to say that we have a living laboratory, so we're trying to understand the biggest challenges around energy and clean energy transitions, and really demonstrate how those best practices can be implemented at our own campus. So the partnerships and our campus experiments, but also the building designs, are really important to the work that we do. We do a lot of work in renewable power, as you would guess from the name of our organization. We used to be the Solar Energy Research Institute, but then branched out into wind, water, geothermal, marine power. We have a lot of different types of technologies that we research and develop at the laboratory. We also have sustainable transportation work. Energy efficiency is at the heart of most of the work that we do, and a lot of energy systems integration. So the work that I'm going to be talking about today really is cross-cutting around all of these different technology types and sectors. And so I fall within the energy systems integration category in trying to determine how all of these different technology areas fit together in a resilient and holistic way. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing in the US Virgin Islands. And I want to set the stage by providing some context. A lot of remote islands, similar to the USVI, are dependent on fossil fuel for generation of electricity and also the treatment of water. In 2010, the USVI established a goal to reduce fossil fuel-based energy use by 60% by 2025, and that was based on a 2008 baseline. And as a result, the utility has been improving energy efficiency and diversifying energy resources such as wind, solar, and natural gas in their mix. Unfortunately, as many of you know, in 2018, 2 Category 5 storms occurred in the Caribbean, Hurricanes Irma and Maria, which caused really extensive damage to a lot of the Caribbean islands, including the USVI islands of St. Croix, St. John, and St. Thomas. And as Michelle could probably tell you, Puerto Rico was incredibly damaged as well as a result of the storms. This is important because the damages that were seen were really significant, and the estimated damages were upwards of $7 billion just in the USVI alone. Generation systems in the conventional power plants fared fairly well, but a lot of the distributed systems and the power transmission lines and distribution lines were damaged. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and how that relates to the 60% fossil fuel reduction goal that the USVI had established. In a lot of cases, we're seeing that the grid of the past is no longer working for us in terms of being prepared for more damaging natural disasters and the integration of a lot of technologies that we're seeing. Historically, there was a one-way centralized power system that just fed from the generation plant over transmission and distribution lines to the end consumer. What we're seeing now, however, is that we have multiple generation sources. There's bulk power generation, combustion engines can be used. There are distributed energy technologies like wind and solar that can be used. We also have technologies like battery systems, which can be used for energy storage, as well as hydro storage. So we have a lot of different types of technologies that can generate power. But then also on the consumer side, we have a lot of options available to consumers in terms of where they have control over their consumption. Through smart meters, they can control HVAC systems or air conditioning units just with a phone. They can turn water heaters on and off with a phone. But we also have a lot of options available to us in terms of having on-site renewable energy, battery systems, electric vehicles, and all of these technologies mean that our grid has to be designed to operate differently. It has to allow for the production of energy at what used to be the end point or the grid edge and feed back into the grid potentially. So this is a very different mix and a very different design that needs to be considered for some of those resilience considerations that we'll be talking about. What is really important is to think through, and I know that every time a disaster occurs, people are really interested in how the damages could have been prevented. With the most recent cyber attack in the eastern part of the United States, we've been hearing a lot more about how cyber attacks can be prevented. Every time there's a natural disaster, it's the same topic. How could this have been less damaging? So what we saw with Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Irma is we're noticing more hurricanes are coming in quick succession. So communities are not able to recover before the next hurricane occurs. And this causes a lot of compounding damages, compounding hazards that really impact communities and the energy infrastructure. So in Puerto Rico, as many of you noticed, it took 11 months to restore the power, which at the time made it the largest blackout in US history. What you see on the right side of the screen is a damaged solar PV system in the US Virgin Islands. And what we're trying to understand at NREL is how can we influence the design of renewable energy technologies and distributed energy technologies, as well as understanding grid vulnerabilities so that these technologies are not damaged in this way in the future and can withstand future events. Because we know another storm is on the horizon and we want to be prepared so that the impacts to the communities that have these systems are less damaged and it's less significant. One of the things that we do in our disaster recovery support is assess what the damages were to understand how some of these failures within systems and impacts within communities can be prevented in the future. So as part of the US Virgin Islands work that we were involved in, we did work with FEMA to understand what ground-mounted PV systems and roof-mounted PV systems, as well as the overarching grid, were impacted and how those impacts can be reduced in the future. Roof-mounted PV was prevalent across the USVI because of that 60% reduction in fossil fuel goal that I mentioned previously. And one of the things that we noticed is that sometimes the panels themselves were fine, but there were failures as a result of falling debris. What you see on the left-hand side is actually a picture from the FEMA material assessment team. And an antenna fell on these panels, causing damage across them. In some cases, the clips were not secured or there wasn't through bolting. And so a lot of the recommendations that we've been identifying are related to either material science or making sure that these PV systems are secure before a storm occurs. So what you see here on the left is an example of where some panels just detached from a roof because the clamping or the through bolting wasn't secure enough. And what we also saw was in some cases where the solar panels were overhanging a roof line or a parapet wall, that caused some uplift and the panels were actually just ripped off the roof. So making sure that these types of situations are limited in the future is going to be beneficial. And I'll come back to reasons for that in a minute. The picture on the top right is a picture of a roof-mounted PV system in the US Virgin Islands that was not impacted by the hurricanes in 2018. And what's interesting here is if you're trying to achieve a fossil fuel reduction goal, you really do want to make sure that you're integrating energy efficiency and distributed energy technologies in a way that is going to be able to withstand storms, but also provide power to people who are going to need that power if the larger grid system is damaged. That sounds pretty simple in and of itself, but it's very challenging to integrate. And if you think back to the picture of how the grid system has changed and we have a lot more control and flexibility and technologies being integrated, this is a very complex and complicated solution and is something that requires a lot of collaboration between the utility and energy office, stakeholders on the ground to make sure that these systems are being designed so that people are going to have the power when they need it the most. So a lot of that comes down to understanding design specifications for different materials that are used within renewable energy technologies. For racking systems in the example that I showed previously, making sure that things like racking systems and clamps are installed correctly, and then verifying that those have been installed, but also maintaining those systems so that they have the ability to be corrected if there is a challenge with them. So one of the projects that we're working on right now for Puerto Rico is designing pre-hurricane checklists so that the system owners can go out and verify that the systems are secure, the panels are secured to the racking or to the roof materials, and electrical equipment is protected from the elements, so that hopefully when the hurricane passes, those systems will be undamaged, they'll be intact, and able to produce power after the storm. It's also really important to understand where you're going to have challenges with things like uplift or wind loading, if the soil conditions are not ideal for a secure installation, but also where you might have neighborhoods or communities that are at the end of a grid line and could really benefit from having things like a community solar garden or integrating islanding controls and battery systems to allow PV systems to operate when the larger grid system is down. These are all very complicated pieces that need to come together in a holistic way to make sure that the systems are being implemented in a resilient fashion. And then finally, understanding the costs and benefits associated with all of these measures is something that's a fairly new research area, but we have some resources that might be of interest to some of you in terms of calculating the cost of inaction and really understanding the benefits of having these types of energy systems installed and operational before and after a storm. So as I've mentioned, resilience planning is a holistic process and really needs to consider all of the different risks to the system, but also the stakeholder needs. If a government like the USVI has a goal to reduce dependence on fossil fuel, and one way to do that is to incorporate renewable energy technologies, really understanding where those technologies should be installed, who's going to benefit from the production of that power, and then how resilience can be incorporated into the designs of those systems, into the infrastructure systems, and the community is going to be beneficial long term. And with that, I thank you all for your time this morning, and I will hand it over to Kyle Fleming with the Virgin Islands Energy Office.
Thank you, Eliza. Much appreciated. And thank you for the presentation as well. Good morning. My name is Kyle Fleming, as you mentioned, Director of the Virgin Islands Energy Office. Happy to be here today. And I'm going to give a little bit of, through my presentation, we'll talk a little bit about, and actually it's going to tie in very nicely to many of the topics that Eliza just brought up, and a little bit more highlight specifically to some of the ongoing efforts that the Virgin Islands has been undertaking to enable more resiliency across the grid, both at the centralized and decentralized aspects. So just a brief, I think most of my bio was covered in the intro, so I'm not going to go too much back into that, but I will talk a little bit about the Energy Office because that has been, this has really been an agency and of high opportunity and high opportunity for impact here in the territory. As a division of the central government, we wear many hats because we have a semi-autonomous power plant here. So there are a lot of actions within the authority that do fall into the perspective and support of the Energy Office as well. So by having a public power authority, we are able to have not just impact at the distributed level, but also at the centralized energy level as well. And we've really focused in on policy development in both of those arenas, and it's been helpful for us that we've been fortunate to have a myriad of federal funds been made available, not just following the 2017 storms, but also through our general and formula allotments of resources and support that we've been able to channel towards a lot of the endeavors that are really seeking to implement the changes that are needed to improve the resiliency of the energy system here in the territory. And I'll give a little bit of overview for those who are not as familiar. So the Virgin Islands is made up of 3 different islands, 4 technically, but 3 major islands, and there's 2 separate grids. So St. Croix has its own centralized power plant and own internal grid that only supports the island of St. Croix. In St. Thomas and St. John, there's one centralized power plant. However, there's a submersible cable that connects St. Thomas and St. John. So that central power plant on St. Thomas supplies energy to both islands. So just even in looking at that, we already have a very unique kind of operation, because we have one entity that is essentially responsible for 2 independent grids and energy systems. That presents a number of challenges, and we also have very different conditions, both topographically as well as which presents issues relative to for our power line infrastructure, as well as renewable integration on St. Thomas and St. John, which are very hilly and very mountainous terrain compared to St. Croix, which has a much more gradual terrain and almost plain-like conditions, which opens the door for solar, specifically development at ground-mounted solar development. And so we have these very different conditions, but it's one entity supplying power and support and the very valuable resource of energy to the territory as a whole. With those challenges, we also have some of the highest rates in the certainly within the U.S. And dare I say globally on some levels, where we have a residential electricity rate which is 41 cents per kilowatt hour and a commercial rate which is 45 cents a kilowatt hour. It's important to understand those prices, especially as we look at the approach to technology investment, because those price points create essentially a natural incentive for both from the government level as well as the private industry to make investments in renewable and alternative energy sources, which in of itself presents its own myriad of challenges, but it is a precursory decision maker for many throughout the territory. And I think the 2017 storms compounding that have created a very unique, I think, environment for specifically for distributed energy systems throughout the territory. There's a little bit relative to the generation mix. So we are primary propane run at the power plants, but on St. Croix and St. Thomas. It's about an 80-20 mix between 80% propane, 20% diesel, and that is consistent across both islands. We're looking at peak demand of 41 megawatts on St. Croix and 50 megawatts on St. Thomas and St. John. So that just to provide a little bit of context relative to the type of demand that needs to be met, and the various ways that it is met currently is primarily through imported fossil fuel. But with our ever-growing penetration of renewables, especially on the distributed level, we're certainly seeing a lot of changes in how the energy needs are met within the territory. I wanted to take a quick second to talk a little bit about, combining both the way we've been able to address some of the challenges that we've experienced on normal operating conditions as well as in post energy emergency events. And I wanted to highlight a microgrid project that was recently approved by the U.S. Department of Interior for the largest hurricane emergency shelter on St. Croix. I've included some statistics about this space, but it is actually one of the largest high school on island that doubled as a shelter following the 2017 storms. It housed hundreds of displaced residents and really became a primary accommodations as so many homes were destroyed in the storm. And while that resource in of itself was incredibly valuable, by not having power for 3 months available from the grid, that site, which was supporting the lives of many, became highly dependent on an emergency generator. That in of itself presented some issues because the on-site generator was non-functional or did not maintain function throughout this time. And additional generators had to be identified and deployed at this site to be able for it to continue to perform its functions. The reality is, being resilient, not just in anticipation of an event, but actually during the inevitable recovery is of a high priority. And what we at the Energy Office, in partnership with some other local agencies, both the Human Services and Department of Education, sought out a microgrid to diversify the energy portfolio of this facility, understanding that in the time of a storm, we want to ensure for such a critical facility that there's always going to be the resource availability in terms of energy available. And by relying solely on diesel generators was certainly not the optimal option, not only between the challenges relative to the operation and maintenance of that infrastructure, but also fueling. One of the things that we've learned is, especially after the 2017 storms, the generator is only as good as it's maintained, as well as the fuel that's available to support it. Understanding that the supply chains of imported fossil fuels become heavily disrupted during a post-energy emergency, especially a post-hurricane event. In my opinion, and many people, and I think in the territory's opinion as a whole, we understand that reliance on a commodity that we have very little control over certainly doesn't put us in a ideal, resilient position. So by diversifying the energy resources available at that site, we're able to not only I'll give a little bit of context. So what we're actually looking at doing is a 100 kW solar farm with a 200 to 300 kilowatt hour battery storage at this site. The size of the system is focused specifically at addressing the shelter needs. So instead of trying to support the entire facility, we identified the areas of the facility that are utilized as a shelter during emergency situations and emergency response. And so that allowed us to have a little bit more conservative budget relative to being able to afford and enable the deployment of this microgrid at this emergency shelter. And really the goal overall, was considered a pilot program because we really see this as being for all the critical infrastructure throughout the territory, whether it be communication, whether it be healthcare, whether it be even the administrative support that goes into keeping the recovery moving. Looking at this critical infrastructure and looking at diversifying the energy resources available at those locations to ensure that there is the highest likelihood of resiliency, so that way we can really focus on the actual recovery and not so much on the logistics of keeping this critical infrastructure energized, which was really a key highlight from the 2017 storms. And so in an attempt to address that, focusing at these critical infrastructure sites, we're actually in the process of seeking out a similar grant for a microgrid at one of the primary telecommunication towers on St. Thomas. In the same vein, the disruption in supply chain of fuel sources to a remote location, such as a primary telecommunication tower, can disrupt a number of the recovery actions that need to be taken. So once again, looking at being solely reliant on diesel generators to supply resiliency really not being an option that we want to commit to moving forward, and constantly looking at ways where we could diversify and opportunities where we can diversify the energy portfolio at these critical infrastructure sites is a primary goal of the the territory, the Energy Office, and the Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority. Just to give a little bit of context as well for the broader landscape, even outside of the government sector, is really looking at private industry. And the private industry has propelled really evolved in the utilization of diversifying the energy resources that whether it be commercial or residential, utilize to support their either businesses or their lifestyles. Once again, going back to the high cost of energy here in the territory, that already creates a natural incentive for alternative energy utilization. So we've seen a high growth, especially at the commercial and industrial level, where being their own power provider, whether it be through renewable measures or at times standard thermal generation, has been an option that many commercial and industrial businesses have taken here in the territory. Even outside of energy emergencies, the Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority has struggled with reliability issues, and so as a result, there's a lot of decision making that is both economic and as well from a resiliency standpoint in the private sector, seeking to be their own power producer has become a highly adapted or adopted approach to providing resiliency at their own sites. So we've seen this grow, and as this demand has grown and the availability of technology to meet this demand has grown globally, we're seeing a very high penetration of on-site generation, both at the residential and commercial level. The residential, I think, was particularly impacted by the storms, and I think what we saw here in the territory in particular was prior to the 2017 storms, most solar installations were simply grid tied. So people took advantage of the savings that the solar could provide to them. We had a very gratuitous net metering program here, which once again at 40 cents plus per kilowatt hour rates was a clear no-brainer to anybody who could afford the investment. But at the time, with battery storage technology not being as far along as it is today, and it has been in the last few years, it wasn't as commonplace to see storage integration with coupled to existing distributed solar installations. The 2017 storms changed that drastically. People whose solar systems survived the storm were the lucky ones that were so fortunate, realized that their grid-tied solar didn't provide much value to them without the grid available. And as we looked at 3 to 4 months for some of power outages, an alternative was necessary. And so the timing of the availability of stationary storage and residential storage solutions, we saw a high growth in new solar installations having storage coupled, as well as existing solar installations or battery storage being added to existing solar installations. Actually, the picture to the right was originally a standard solar system that received a battery storage system following the 2017 storms, which then enabled them to utilize their solar to power their home during the times and during the window of non-grid availability. This has become standard practice. We have a solar program currently that the Energy Office administers, and I would say about 99% of new residential solar installations have battery storage coupled to them. So this has been something that the community, the Virgin Islands community as a whole, has adopted. While we do find some challenges relative to the supply chain for battery storage, wherever possible, this is the path that the community has engaged and recognized as really being not a luxury, but a requirement, especially if they're making these large investments in alternative energy. Having on-site storage has become essentially a standard and a package deal as it pertains to those types of investments. One of the challenges, though, when it comes to seeing that that resiliency grow on a distributed level is the fact that the gaps in energy equity. So yes, while many people are taking advantage of the technology availability to both provide energy savings and energy resiliency through solar and storage, what we have seen is that the lion's share of those who are able to take advantage of that resource are the ones that have that can afford outright to make these investments. This is clearly not a reality for many people within the territory. So we really look at ways in which, from the Energy Office standpoint, ways in which that same value and that same benefit can be extended at a broader level. We all are going to be subject to the same challenges following another catastrophic event. And the broader perspective and the broader availability of distributed energy resources that can be provided and that we can, through our agency, create access to on a broader scale is a primary focus of our agency and really from the administration as a whole, to ensure that the resiliency is something that the territory can take part in. And we know it's going to be a lengthy road, and there's a lot of challenges to expanding that growth in some of the underserved communities. But we've been creative and we've had a lot of support from a myriad of federal grants that have enabled us to both explore and implement some of the solutions that we think will drive broader adoption and sustainable adoption, really. We do see that even as we grow the distributed network, doing that in tandem and in parallel with making sure that the centralized grid also is maintained and sustained as well, is a primary focus that we're constantly trying, and a balance that we're constantly trying to meet from both from the government standpoint and from the Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority standpoints as well. Hearing that, though, that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any more questions, and I guess I'll turn it over to Michelle, I think, as we would transition into the Q&A forum.
Thank you for that amazing presentation, and thank you, Eliza, for also doing the presentation. Yes, we'll go to a Q&A right now, but before doing that, and maybe as a transition for the question and answer portion, I would like to update the poll answers. Actually, we had 0% answering yes, and we had 40% saying that not completely. Their power systems in their community are not more resilient for future disaster-related events. They're not completely. That was 40%, and then 60% answered no, and I would like more information on how my community can benefit from an efficient energy resource utilization program. And I think those answers are very on point on where we are, and I would like to move forward with this Q&A on where are we right now, almost 4 years after Hurricane Irma and Maria, with these initiatives, as you are aware, and maybe now I can share with our audience. I'm here in Puerto Rico, and before going live with this presentation, I myself found had no electricity. The electricity went on out of nowhere, and this in my community happens on almost a daily basis. So I'm guessing that a lot of our audience based in Puerto Rico and in US Virgin Islands are asking, almost 4 years after these hurricanes, how prepared are we in 2021 to confront and battle and sustain future disaster-related events? What we need to reinforce or create moving forward, and I'll leave it to you guys.
I guess I'll take the kind of the first stab. So I think really what it as I said, as we've tried to highlight and is really taking a lot of the lessons learned from the 2017 storms and some of the immediate kind of aftermath. So not just looking at the challenges relative to either whether it be on-site generation, but also taking a step back and also looking at supply chain as well. What we've also taken on is a number of undergrounding efforts for realizing that even though we've tried to strengthen and we use the most robust above ground transmission and distribution systems, especially as these hurricanes are getting stronger. We're seeing, Category 5s being a standard, almost a guaranteed to see at least one per year. And as robust as the infrastructure that we tried to implement, 200 mile per hour winds combined with a myriad of debris and vegetation, it's really hard to build resiliency or to holistically address resiliency from that infrastructure with these conditions that we're subject to. So undergrounding has been something that we've been investing in heavily, realizing that if the challenges above ground are always going to be there, and undergrounding serves as as certainly a solution, while an expensive solution, a very expensive solution. If we look at the continued investment in having to replace down poles on a reoccurring basis, having to constantly, expensive vegetation management to mitigate challenges to the above ground infrastructure. Undergrounding at critical areas across the territory has been another solution set that we have fortunately to be funded and are actively executing here in the territory to expand that resiliency.
Excellent. Thank you, Kyle. Elisa, would you like to complement that answer, or? I think Elisa, it's frozen, I think. Oh. Yeah. But also, Kyle, I have...
Oh. Yeah, Michelle, I might be having some internet connection challenges. Kyle was breaking up for me, so I'll just let you go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Kyle, we have another question, and this one is for you. It's how has the local government targeted its goal to provide workshop trainings to bolster local workforce development to design and support microgrid technology?
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of ways. So I'll give an example of a recent development that we had. There was actually a partnership between the Virgin Islands Department of Labor and one of the nonprofits, one of the very active nonprofits here in the territory, specifically on St. Croix, where they received some funding for a solar installer program. And I think they were able to, between the Department of Labor and the nonprofit, they were able to take 10 students through the process and to become installers. And primarily they all actually, I think, if not 10 of 10, certainly 9 of 10 of the students that graduated from that program about 6 months ago have all been gainfully employed throughout the territory at various solar installers. Specifically on the microgrid side, what we've done, and one of the things that I've certainly prioritized from our agency standpoint, is the same microgrid project that we're doing at the emergency hurricane shelter. Part of the grant funding request identified and allocated funding specifically towards workforce development surrounding microgrids. We realized that the asset alone is not going to be able to provide all the value for the territory. So being able to identify and request funding for the workforce development surrounding the asset that we're seeking to implement, that was approved through our grant request, which we're fortunate to have happen. And that's something that we're going to also be utilizing through the development of that microgrid, is also workforce development in parallel. And that's really a strategy that I'm promoting on all the projects that we do, not just limited to energy, but across the board, because ultimately, if we focus solely on the asset and integration of the asset and miss out on the opportunity to bolster the workforce, especially those who are going to be on the ground supporting that asset throughout its lifetime of operation, I think we're only capturing one aspect. And so to be more holistic by including workforce development and essentially all infrastructure grants that we're seeking to implement has been a strategy that's been fruitful for us so far.
Excellent. That sounds great. And really good efforts, and I see a good future moving forward in the U.S. Virgin Islands with that. Great. I have another question here. It's, what about portable solutions? I dream of adapting the system at living energy farms to fit into a 6 to 8 backpacks with roll-up solar panels. What are your thoughts on mobility?
I'll let Eliza jump on this one, and I'll follow up.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Maria. I just said that Kyle's giving me the tough question. I think mobility is something that a lot of people are really interested in. I know that we've been researching these types of solutions for disaster response efforts, but also within military operations. This is something that they're interested in. At some point, it might become a solution that is more logistically feasible, but also less cost prohibitive. So with all of the technologies that we're looking at for resilience and for disaster recovery, it really is a matter of prioritizing where you want these technologies to be used. So if it makes sense for emergency responders to have solar panels that roll up in a backpack so they can provide emergency power to specific communities or populations of people, that might be an area to focus. As Kyle mentioned, with critical facilities and community shelters, that's often the location where we're seeing communities investing in things like islanded microgrids with on-site generation possibilities. So these might be the types of situations where you would see more of those innovative and mobile solutions. And Kyle, I don't know if you want to talk about the mobile solar system that the Virgin Islands Energy Office has and how that fared.
Yeah, so we actually, thank you, Eliza. We actually have, I wish if I would have been more mobile with my screen, I could have showed you, we actually have a trailer, an actual mobile solar trailer here on site. We had one prior to the storms that actually received, that was, unfortunately, we weren't able to secure it. And so it received some damage during the storm, but we actually had that system replaced. And it's essentially what would resemble like a horse trailer, but it's fully outfitted with inverter and inverter, batteries, and a 2.4 kW solar array as well. And it's something that we've utilized, and we actually are coupling a EV charger to the trailer as well. And so that way we not only have an opportunity to provide mobile energy in emergency situations, but also as we're also in parallel trying to grow the transportation electrification, especially within the government fleet. So being able to provide a variety of energy resources to provide charging infrastructure is something that we're also doing in parallel with that mobility. So I think it's certainly, I think Eliza hit a key point, the expense. I think cost can certainly create a barrier. I think we were fortunate to once again receive the funding to replace the system that we had. But once again, I think the impact, by showing the value of the impact that these solutions can have, and in our experience, we've been able to continue to garner additional support and allocations to continue to make these types of investments as we've in parallel been able to demonstrate the value. So I think that's how we get over that's been one of the ways that we've gotten over the cost barrier standpoint is just in being able to constantly justify the impact, through the various solution sets that we've deployed from the energy mobility standpoint.
Excellent. That sounds great. I'm actually also looking into those innovative ideas that we have in the future for mobility on solar and power grids. That will be great. We have a couple more questions. I like this one. This is how are communities being involved in making power grid more resilient? This is for either of you.
Yeah, I'll give a couple quick points. So we've had one of the things that we've allowed, or not allowed, I should say, enabled was we've recently had a IRP, Integrated Resource Planning endeavor from the Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority. And through that IRP process, there was actually a number of town hall meetings that were held. So as the authority was developing, as the authority was developing the IRP, we wanted to ensure that the community engagement was part of the planning process and not just being updated or presented, a final report. So that's been one way where we've been trying to create visibility and access to the solutions that we're trying to bring to the territory from the energy standpoint, and also using that platform to get a better understanding of the specific needs, not only once again for emergencies, but even for ongoing blue sky operation, how those sectors of the community, by providing a voice and a platform for the community to present the challenges, just provides better visibility as we're assessing the solution sets that we're trying to bring forward.
Great. Elisa, would you like to also expand on this? I think we're having technical issues with, she's having technical issues with the connection. Elisa, are you there? No. Yeah. Okay, great. I have, just let me know when you're back, Elisa. I have a couple more questions. One, there's like 2 or 3 pending for Elisa specifically. So Kyle, I'm gonna ask you this one specifically for you. What type of initiatives were developed to address a better homeowner understanding of critical loads and relative electrical demand?
Yeah, actually, well, so we're that's a great question, a timely one, I think, because we're actually in the rollout phase of a real-time energy monitoring program here at the Energy Office. And what we actually are doing, we're installing in-panel energy monitors at homes throughout the territory. And what we're trying to do is provide a level of visibility of energy loads within the home and the energy profile of the home that most people just don't have access to. Everybody gets their monthly bill, and that aggregate of 30 days of use. It's very hard to infer some of the more granular impacts and things that are actually creating the final bill that they see. So by enhancing the visibility through the data collection of real-time energy monitoring, is certainly a way in which people are getting a better understanding of the actual loads in their home. We certainly see that quite often, that there's just a lack of comprehensive understanding of energy, especially from people who aren't deeply rooted in all the nuances to how it interacts with their home. And so we wanted to try to create that by using visibility of the data and presenting it in a very user-friendly interface to have people be better understanding of their usage, so they can see what their gas dryer versus their maybe electric stove and how the variance in impact that certain appliances are having in their home. And then through, I think the reality is, from a critical load standpoint, the storms themselves created a lot of visibility. People understand the things that they actually needed to survive and to have, essentially to maintain, a semblance of normalcy. So I think the lack of the resources certainly created that perspective. But now by being able to provide a better understanding of what the impacts of those the various critical loads within a home can be, it allows them to make some decisions. If it's one thing to design a solar system to try to run a number of electric appliances, especially the water pumps, electric dryers, electric stoves. And if, by identifying those as critical loads that you want to support, but realizing that maybe a gas alternative can certainly lower the lower the electrical demand that they need to sustain. I think once again, it provides by providing that visibility, I think it enables the decision making on the homeowner side and what would be needed to support those critical loads in the event of another long-term blackout.
Excellent. That's great. Kind of like following up with that question, is the U.S. Virgin Islands doing a specific approach regarding the acquisition of these solar panels for more vulnerable communities? Is there some kind of program or initiatives going on with that?
Yeah, so we actually have what's actually a carryover from the ERA funds. So in 2009 to 2010, when the American Revitalization and Recovery, I'm horrible with acronyms. When that program was underway, there was a number of funds made available for the Virgin Islands, and there is actually still some carryover of those funds that we have access to, and it's called our Sun Power Loan Program. So initially, that program was specific to solar hot water heaters, and I think it was low interest loans for solar hot water heaters. However, we've identified that while solar hot water heaters is certainly a great opportunity for energy efficiency and reducing your demand for heating water in the home, there's so many other electrical or energy demands that a home can have, and so we've expanded the scope of eligibility from solar hot water heaters to solar and battery storage. And this program is specifically catering to addressing the energy equity challenges that we've had. And we're trying to focus the criteria for eligibility to the more underserved communities to ensure that access to renewable energy resilience is something that that the underserved communities have access to as well. And so that the disparity between energy resiliency isn't limited solely to those that can outright afford it. So the Sun Power Loan Program is what was once a Sun Power Loan Program, which has now become the Sun Power Grant Program, is one of the major initiatives that we're finalizing the program structure and intend to be rolling out hopefully before the end of this year. And we're actually working in partnership with the authority as well to expand the scope of that project to be able to impact as many homes as possible throughout the territory.
That's great. Great information right there. Elisa, are you here with us?
I believe so. I keep cutting in and out, and I apologize for that.
No, don't worry. Everybody's here is aware of our virtual technology and all those challenges that it brings. Yes, I have a couple questions directed for you, so maybe we can start with that. The first question that we have specifically for Elisa is, does the NREL have community solar programs?
We do have community solar programs. We are a federally funded research and development center, so we have funding available from the Department of Energy to support those types of programs. One of those, I believe, is still active is the Solar Energy Innovation Network. And there are a number of different types of programs that are available that offer technical assistance, holistic resilience planning, energy planning, and looking at the solar resource potential within specific communities to identify what types of technologies would be appropriate in those locations and able to produce the energy that might be needed for different types of loads. So if you are interested in learning more about those types of programs, I welcome people and encourage people to visit the Department of Energy website and look for community solar programs or for technical assistance, and those types of programs should come up in that search.
Excellent. Thank you for that information. I have another question directed to you. It's, does the NREL have research on circular economy regarding solar PV systems?
We do. We have some life cycle assessment analysts at NREL who look at different technologies to understand the cradle to grave or circular economy type of challenges with each of those technologies. And we do have researchers who are looking specifically at solar PV. A lot of our researchers are also looking at how to harden PV systems and make them more sustainable to future natural hazards. So looking at all aspects of the supply chain and the life cycle of those technologies and how to really help them perform the best and get the most energy out of them when they are in production, but then understanding how to recycle some of those materials when they're at the end of their useful lifetime.
Perfect. And it kind of interconnects with that one, because it's also a question for regarding the scope of the NREL. It says here, do you guys have research on agrovoltaics?
We do. The research that we have in agrovoltaics, and I'll just mention we have some photovoltaic research as well, which is floating solar panels. Both of those programs are, yeah, both of those programs are funded by the Department of Energy. And there's an effort right now that we are working on called the INSPIRE program. And that is looking at the benefits and the challenges associated with incorporating solar panels into agricultural lands. One example of a challenge that you might see is if you decide to put solar panels in a field where you have goats, as an example. I think many people know that goats will eat through just about anything, and so farmers have found that that's not a good pairing of technology and livestock. But if you have sheep in a field where you have solar panels, sheep can actually be beneficial because they'll eat the grass underneath the panels and keep that grass low so that you don't have to mow under the panels. It helps with air circulation and prevents the panels from overheating. So that can be a really beneficial combination. So that's the kind of research that we're doing through that DOE funded program.
Perfect.
Okay. I just got a quick follow-up to that. We actually on the island of St. Croix, we have a 4 megawatt, the only 4 megawatt, the only utility scale solar farm on island is a 4 megawatt installation that they have actually implemented the vegetation management through livestock approach. Actually, prior to my role at the Energy Office, I was providing operation and maintenance support for that field, and vegetation management was the #1 challenge we were having, both through the overgrowth, being entangled in the wire bundles, and even being able to do any maintenance and support or even string testing was limited. And it was just such a large field, and the cost of vegetation management for hiring crews was exorbitant and difficult. And also, you really don't want weed whackers or weed eaters underneath these panels. They throw debris, rocks, which can damage the panels and the coatings on the panels and shatter the panels as well. And so they implemented the sheep livestock vegetation management solution, and I drive by it almost every day, and it's one of those covered fields you see. There's just a flock of sheep that have kept the vegetation there totally under control over the last 2 years. And so, the field continues to be productive and at a much lower cost. So we've certainly seen the implementation of that solution set here come to fruition. And I think it's one of those simple fixes that it's great to see focus going in, and it's also great to see the results such as what we've experienced here in the territory.
Excellent, perfect. We have another question, and this for either of you guys. It says, beyond large buildings, how might energy efficiency and DSM be promoted in underdeveloped communities in a way that doesn't feel top down? That's the question.
I think that's, I'll just give a little bit of context. I think that there is I think it's hard for it to not be top down, because the decision, like that control generally has to happen. From that aggregation support has to happen from a very high level. But I think one of the things that we certainly look at is how we can get the community as a whole to better understand, how the demand side management, demand response measures can be a benefit to so instead of looking at benefits specifically to their home, looking at how certain controls and enabling of certain controls can be beneficial to the grid as a whole. So trying to break down, if you will, like the silos of excellence that people have relative to the solutions that they implement and the technologies that they implement, and using our opportunity to inform and educate about how these solutions can also benefit the broader community as well. And I think communication is a big piece to overcoming that barrier.
Yeah, I agree with that, Kyle. I think that one of the things that we've noticed is really important to the success of these different projects or programs is really having community involvement and getting stakeholder input, so that people who are using systems on a daily basis or need these systems are being engaged in that process. So that's one recommendation that I would make to anybody who's asking these types of questions. Really get involved in the process and make sure that your voice is being heard and different communities are being represented in these conversations.
Great. That's an excellent tip. And we have one more question, and this one is for Kyle. It says, Kyle mentioned high utility costs in Virgin Islands. It was like 41 cents per kilowatt watts. What is the estimated cost of electricity for Virgin Island homes with an on-site solar generation battery storage system?
So I guess I'm assuming the question may be, so the rate itself from the utility would be the same if their overall cost. I mean, I would say most systems are designed, especially solar and storage systems, are designed to be net zero. So oftentimes, if they have the availability, you're seeing a significant reduction in the demand to essentially zero. Is what most installers strive to do, or at least that's what we've seen, at least throughout the community. That's technically the strategy that's employed. We do have, specifically from a rate standpoint, we do have our new solar program. So we still allow for interconnection of solar and storage systems to the grid. But since we've closed out the net metering program, which was closed in 2017, the new program that we have in place has a rate structure where the excess generation that you return to the grid is valued at a lower rate than your retail rate that you would purchase energy from the grid. And what we've strived to do in adjusting that rate for excess generation for distributed resources is try to right size what the utility compensates the distributed energy resource to more the variable cost as opposed to the fixed cost, which the retail rate covers as well. So from a rate standpoint, that's the specific difference. From the actual savings standpoint, yeah, we're seeing most customers striving for net zero. So anywhere from $100 to $500 per month in savings. I mean, even more so depending on the system size. But we're seeing most customers that go this route, they're seeking to essentially eliminate their obligation to the utility from a cost standpoint.
Great. Thank you very much, Kyle, for answering that question. I think we don't have more questions on the board, so we can be wrapping up. I am very grateful for the opportunity to have this panel on solar USVI, on resilient power grids for emergency preparedness. Thank you for our speakers, Elise and Kyle, for being here and having a great presentation for us. And thank you for the audience for engaging in the process. These questions were great, and also for the poll. We will definitely take that into account and the future when we were doing all our technical assistance and support in our communities. Remember, the audience, if you all of the sessions from the conference are being recorded, and they will be available next week in the event website. So be on the lookout for that. You will be receiving an email for that. Right now, we're going to end this panel, but I encourage you to take a quick break, go grab some lunch, and then be back, because at 12 sharp, we'll be having our interagency working group. It's an approach to problem solving. And right after that, we'll have our closing reflections and also a network space. That will be great for if you can also join on that process. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.